Hi, this is Tom from Nightingale Games talking about War Room, game by Larry Harris. This video is going to be a little bit redundant with another I made that talks about the scenarios and the strategies overview of the game, except this time there are units and commands on the map, so we can get a little bit deeper. I'm going to talk about the Axis first, and I might put the allies in another video if I run out of time. And I've been told I have a soporific voice, so if you can watch this if you're trying to fall asleep. Yeah, so anyway, on with it. Let's start with our good friends, the Germans. The game starts in the spring of '42. We gave ourselves some leeway there, so it kind of fudges several months after that and several months before that. But now that there are units on the map, you can see that there's a big wall along this eastern front here, and these two typically slam against each other. Sometimes it's a zig or zag question. Sometimes who's going to go north, who's going to go south, who's going to go in the middle. That's a big part of the gameplay. In fact, that's the whole situation in the two-player game where it's just the Soviets versus the Germans. There's 4 scenarios overall. I'll be talking about the global scenario in this video. So you can see the extensive rail network, so they can zip land units all the way from France up to the front if they feel like crushing the Soviets first and then dealing with Britain later and the US. That's a strategy I've seen taken. You can see there's numerous armor in each of these stacks at the bottom. I put the yellow in the middle for contrast against the blue and the green. It's a little bit easier to read. So that is one strategy opening move I've seen, is that simply rush everything to the front and push quickly and as fast as you can to the capital, Moscow, here, in the hopes that you knock out an entire enemy before you are overwhelmed. The Axis in the game generally are at a disadvantage because it is a historical simulation, and especially if the longer the game goes on, the more the US builds up their forces and just crushes everything. So time is not on Germany's side, and they're being attacked from all sides, so it's a difficult role to play. I would generally have one of the better players take on Germany if you're playing with advanced gamers and new people together. So let's continue. You can see they have, let's talk about the Luftwaffe. They have 3 stacks of air units in Norway, Germany, and France. And oftentimes you could, instead of hammering the Soviets, you could take the opposite challenge and try to take down Great Britain before they have a chance to crush you. So that's a pretty hefty invasion, and you could do some strategic bombing runs and knock down their capacity to build new units there. But that's pretty risky, especially if they decide to defend themselves at all. Likewise, abandoning France and rushing to the front is also risky because they could perform a landing here. You do have 3 artillery there, which are good against air defense. So there's pretty heavy air defense that you have in these Western European areas. But yeah, these 3 air commands, Another strategy is simply to combine them so you'll have more options. The limitation of only having 9 orders is you'll definitely feel it if you're Germany, because you want to give out about 20 orders in the first couple rounds. So there's a lot of consolidation simply for that purpose early on. Then there's the Mediterranean. Do you have the Italians help you as Germany, or do you help them? You have in Libya here, the game starts with both Italians present and Germans present. And typically they move to Egypt, and there's a big battle there. And we found that it's if the Italians successfully are able to move any of their, if they do a heavy push towards Egypt, Egypt typically falls. But if Italy is pushing towards defending the Eastern Front, then sometimes Italy holds. There's a battle for control of the Mediterranean. You can see that Italy has a battleship, a submarine, and a cruiser in M2, while the UK has a submarine and a cruiser, which you would think isn't evenly matched. But the British have a carrier and a cruiser over here that often hops into the Mediterranean, and there's a gaining control of the Mediterranean is a significant advantage for either side, the Axis or the Allies. And there's a string of territories along northern Africa that are vulnerable since they don't have much defense. Sometimes Britain comes up and tries to snag some of those from South Africa, but they don't have much to come with, and there are some defending subs out in the west here. Let's move on to the Atlantic. You can see that the British have battleships, 2 battleships and 2 cruisers just sitting out there. So there's not a lot that Germany can do with just their 2 cruisers and a sub initially. They pretty much stay hidden in there unless these guys wander off. Note that the Allies can't enter this unless they take over one of these land forces, then they'd be able to move in. So these submarines, there's 3 here and 2 here, and they might raid these convoys over here. Whether the US or the British attempt to defend them is a good question. If Germany does somehow get out and escape, I've seen them try to leap over here into Canada and make a landing. That's typically pretty rare. Sometimes they come up and try to take on the Russians, do a different landing up there. There are some other air units over here in Hungary, Romania, and the Ukraine. Those tend to cluster together, so unless they assist in control of the Mediterranean, they tend to generally hammer the Soviets over here. And you can see that the Soviets don't start with quite as many air units. They only have 2 fighters, and a bomber there, whereas we've got quite a large air force. You'll notice there aren't any ports along here, so they can't produce new ships to land there. But they can move in land forces across there, so sometimes the Soviets try to sneak across the Black Sea. So we talked a little bit about the Italians already. You can see they're a much smaller force compared to the Germans. We talked about their ships here where they try to maintain control. They have one little infantry unit in Sicily. They sometimes try to hop over and claim Gibraltar, which only has air units. And as mentioned, these forces usually try to take Egypt or the Middle East, but sometimes they're sent by rail up to the front. They could wander out into the Atlantic and do interesting things out here, like try to take Africa or wander all the way across there, or an invasion of Britain. Who knows? But the Italians have the greatest potential for something strange historically to happen. Like we've seen the Italians up here and over here, and they tend to, if it's going well for the Axis, then they end up in really strange places after the fifth turn.